We are towards the end of chapter 25, and we have been discussing now a new perspective on how we can use this natural love to serve. Because until now, we've been using the natural love as a means of not doing the wrong thing, holding back from the wrong through the natural love. And now the Rebbe is saying that we can take this same energy, we can take the same force and use it proactively to serve, not just to hold back from the wrong, but actually positively to serve. So we're on page 62, and we're about 4 lines from the bottom. So we're here talking, the last thing we were discussing 2 weeks ago was really squeezing yourself in serving God, squeezing yourself in Torah, squeezing yourself in prayer, squeezing yourself in doing good things with your money, like charity. All of these ideas, when you're squeezing yourself really hard, this is part of the war, the strategies of the evil inclination, to make us cold, to make cold the soul of man, not to just freely give away his money like to charity, and not to freely just squander his health, and as if, so to speak, serving God could come at a cost. And I don't know if I want that cost. I don't know if that cost. So what's happening here, the Rebbe is saying, is the reason we are needing this energy of this natural love to push me, so I'll work hard in whatever godly pursuit, work hard in studying and absorbing and understanding the Torah, work hard to pray and to pray with intent and focus, work hard to go give beyond my limits, is because I'm really going against the tide. The tide has been created by my animal soul. The natural tide that my animal soul, my evil inclination, those good partners have created inside of me is coldness. I would say apathy, maybe that's too strong a word, but coldness. When you feel cold inside, the Rebbe is saying, you're not going to push. To do anything it takes to serve God that requires pushing. And therefore, the evil inclination says, why should I fight each additional act? Let me make you in general cold. Because if in general you're cold, we're in pretty good shape. The evil inclination says we're in pretty good shape if you're in general cold. So what do you think this is wise strategy? What do you feel yourself when you get cold to something, to anything? What are your experiences?
You want to move to a warmer climate?
So when you're cold to something, you're saying your natural feeling is to move away. Get away from that. Like you're not interested in it. If it's cold in Chicago, I heard tomorrow's supposed to be warmer. You're saying like, I want to move somewhere else. I want to go where it's warm. I'm not interested when I'm in a space that's cold. True. Anyone else? Any feelings on like why the evil inclination would target this goal of coldness, making us feel inside very cold?
Doesn't it depend what's doing with you?
You're saying not all of us fall into this trap?
No, or any individual, what else is doing with them, with their life, with other people. And so, sometimes if you're really down and out about a number of things, you're more likely to fall into, into the Yetzer Hara's traps.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's native susceptibility, and then there's circumstantial susceptibility. Absolutely. the way the Alter Rebbe is writing this, all of us are under this war, this strategy, this technique of the evil inclination to make us cold. In general, there's nothing cold to this specific thing or this specific thing, just to make us cold. In other words, what the Rebbe is saying, if you want to turn it around in the positive, is that a really great quality to have as one who wants to serve God well is passion, is warmth, is excitement, is being alive. Even if your passion, warmth, and excitement are for other things, that's not even so much the point. When you got the right energy, you direct it in the right direction. Get that passion and warmth and then direct it toward God. But if a person's just cold, which could be toward everything, not only towards their godly pursuits, or could be just toward God, but it could be probably everything. When they're just in this cold space, it's like Dana said, you're not interested in anything in that cold space. You're walking away from everything there. Nothing there is appealing to you. Nothing there sparks you. You get into this very deadened, slow-moving, low energy, low investment, low risk-taking, very, very, very minimized space. It's like a slow death. And therefore, the Rebbe is saying we have to really fight this. We need to be alive. We need to be passionate. Now, I'm thinking now of a talk the Rebbe gives, talking to the Lubavitcher Rebbe, where he speaks about it's based on a verse of the bite of a snake versus the bite of a scorpion. And he explains that the bite of a snake is a hot poison and the bite of a scorpion is a cold poison. I mean, obviously, no poison is good for you. But the bite of the snake is like when you have all these passions for all the wrong things, which is bad. But the bite of the scorpion's worse because it's coldness. It's just when you're cold. And cold is a very dead-like space. And that's why our sages say, if a snake is around your ankle and you're praying, you can keep praying. But if a scorpion is around your ankle, you better stop and deal with it, because that's really bad. That's real death. It's very hard. So the Rebbe here in Tanya is very much, throughout Tanya, as we're going to see in the subsequent chapters, very much fights the space of come to as apathy, as desensitized, as depressed. It's all different manifestations. Of course, what Sarah said is true. It depends on a lot of other factors going on inside of you and also your native susceptibility, where you're going to fall, how successful the evil inclination will be, what's going to happen to you. But in general, we're all fighting this. It's a very easy road to just get into that space because our evil inclination is really trying to put us there. Why? Because once we're there, the evil inclination go off to vacation in Florida. We're in a good state, meaning we're in a bad space, because what are we going to do anyway? When we're so minimized by the coldness, we're not going to really accomplish much, not for God and not in any other way either. So the Rebbe is saying that's why you cannot just be satisfied to do what you're supposed to do. I mean, study, no problem, pray, charity. The Rebbe says, no, don't give me no thumbs up. You're good, you're good, you're good. You're not. I want you to squeeze yourself, the Rebbe is saying. I want you to work hard because I want you to express that passion. I want you to feel that passion. I want you to feel that excitement, that energy, that push, because that push means you're alive. That push means something's pulsating, something's moving you. You're fighting and you're winning that coldness. So that's why the Rebbe is saying push. And what's going to get you to push? That natural love. When you have that natural love, then you're going to push. And that's what is going to enable you to overcome this coldness. Because the coldness is a sort of insidious little death going on. So how do I get to this point? How do I succeed in tapping into this natural love to such a degree that I'll be alive, I'll be awake, I'll be excited. I won't be in this apathetic, deadened, cold, disinterested, low energy. No, how do I wake myself up? The Rebbe says, use your natural love. Okay, how do I do that? So the Rebbe says you have to have a certain thought inside of you. It's going to sound pretty similar to some of the strategies we've had before, but there's a different twist here. Because again, until now, we've been saying, use this natural love to hold back from wrong. When you're tempted to do something wrong, that's not a product necessarily of being cold. Now we're saying, use the natural love to inspire you to do right. You're cold, so you're sluggish, so you can't be bothered, so you're disinterested, so you're lazy, so you're apathetic. So to fight all that, you got to do more. And the Rebbe says you got to actually do a lot more, because if you do a little more, it's a little battle. You got to do a lot more because you need a big battle. So how do we do that? You tap into this natural love. What do I tell myself? The Rebbe says, glad you asked. So we're got 2 lines from the bottom of page 62. Now it's very easy, the Rebbe says, the Rebbe's lexicon, very easy to overcome this cold, deadened, apathetic, sad, depressed, minimized space. Very easy. What do you have to remember? That to be victorious over the evil inclination, all of this stuff, and all of the garbage coming because it got me cold. It got me to the space that I don't really care that much. I don't really care. That's what cold feels like. I don't really care. Not just to overcome it. What does this mean? To do the opposite. What's the opposite? Because of my coldness, I don't really care. I can't really be bothered. I'm not really interested. So I'm going to very minimally, perhaps, just do bare minimum. Like, I don't need a front row in Gan Eden, so to speak, personality. I can be all the way in the back. I'm okay too. You got to do the opposite. You want to be front row. You want to give the most and do the most and push the most and be so close to Hashem and alive in your Judaism. Kalmai. Very easy, the Rebbe says. If you compare that suffering of pushing yourself hard for God in contrast to the suffering of death, God forbid, that would be a lot worse. That would be a lot more painful. And if he was under the gun, he would accept lovingly, willingly, all the sufferings of death. Not to be separated from the oneness of God, even one moment. If it's my life versus my God, I'll give up my life, which is a lot of suffering, is a lot of anguish on many levels. And I would do it willingly, lovingly. If it was like bow to this idol will kill you, we're just coming from Hanukkah, we all know that, you die. No question, lovingly, willingly. The kol shekain. So if you'd be willing to die, not to be separated from God for even one period of time, how much more so should you willingly, lovingly accept to cling to God forever? So the Rebbe now gave us a thought, a strategy, a hook to pull out our natural love for the goal of serving God with passion, serving God for real, squeezing in our service of God, being alive in our service of God, throwing that coldness out. We want to be nice and warm in Chicago, no coldness here. So what am I supposed to think? So it's a little bit complex, the thoughts. I'll give it over. It's really like 3 points they're saying here, all in like one long sentence. This is what you have to tell yourself. I'm willing to die for God. Yes, that's our given. That's the fact. We accept that. We have proven it historically, time and again. If it wasn't us, it was our previous lifetime us, it was our ancestors us. Jews die for God. Why am I dying? Because it's not worth it to be separated. Because I'd rather die than sever my connection for God. But it's such a short severing. It's just a few minutes. How long does it take to bow the idol, and then they go on to the next person, they go on to the next city, and you go back to serving God? Not worth it. It's not worth it to have that temporary separation from God. I'd rather die than have that temporary separation from God. That sounds like a very dramatic statement, but as we could say, unfortunately, we know it's true because the world was washed in the blood of the Jews, because we did it again and again and again and again and again. We said we'll die rather than deny God. So that's a historical imperative. That's a fact of our existence. Fact is, the Jews die not to lose their relationship with God. Rebbe says that's a very painful choice. That's a very difficult choice. That choice has a lot of repercussions, and no question you would do it. Isn't it a lot easier to push yourself to live for God? Sounds like what we said before, but we're going to add a twist to it. To push yourself to live for God. And living for God is hard too, right? I mean, you can't eat this, and you can't say that, and you can't think this, and you can't wear that. There's a lot of price tags involved in living for God. But that's a lot less intently difficult than dying for him, which you'd all be completely willing to do. So tell yourself, if I'm willing to die to avoid a temporary disconnection, which is why I'm willing to die, how much more so should I be willing to push to create permanent, deep connections? The Rebbe is weighing here because we said here's a shift from what we said until now. We're talking here not about proactively protective gear, keeping from sin, which is how we've been talking for all these chapters until now. Now we're talking about using this proactively to do more for God. So instead of a temporary disconnection, every time I serve God, I'm creating connections, unbelievable connections, and permanent, eternal connections. And it's so much easier because the suffering is less here than there. So if I'm willing to suffer like that to avoid a temporary disconnection, how much more so should I be willing to pay a far smaller price to push myself to do and create eternal connections with God? That is the thought. That is the thought the Rebbe is advising us to think, to utilize proactively this love for God, that we don't become cold and apathetic and couldn't be bothered and don't really care and are disinterested. Pull out of yourself, you cold, apathetic, don't really care, disinterested person. You would die for God. It's easier to live for him. And isn't it even more important? You die to avoid these temporary disconnections. Shouldn't you live to create permanent connections? So how can you apply this to your life? How can anyone see that they could take this thought, which has these three pieces? It's easier and it's creating these permanent connections. How could you take this concept or your own personalized version of this concept and actually utilize it proactively?
This has, well, because of my chosen field, this has psychological implications in
Let's
there.
hear, Sarah.
So, well, first of all, I would think that somebody would get a pass or a temporary pass if they were really suffering, say, like, God forbid, postpartum depression, where they need medical help to be schlepped out first before they could work on themselves. In some cases, some people might tell you that if you really have this down pat, you could fight it on your own, but I'm not so sure of that in our day and age. So I just wanted to put in, if there really is like a mental medical condition that somebody would need medication, therapy, different things, they might need to do that with it or before it. the other thing is that if you're a self-aware person, then you know, depending on how old you are and how many years experience you have, like I'm 18 with 52 years of experience. So
You
you
remember
know
Elizabeth
what,
Bennis, sorry, yeah.
someone got me a mug. So you know that, you know what can help you pull out of it. And you kind of have to really remind yourself and remember that you've done, and it's also good to do self-talk. I've done it before, and I know that I can master it and do it again for myself, and to be the best for myself with my relationship to Hashem and also to those around me. I rest my case, Your Honor.
I hear everything you said. I hear everything you said, and like I think you said, it's very personalized. It's very, very personalized. But I think as we're going to learn in the next chapters, it's very interesting because we're in chapter 25. Now we're at the end of a section which was since chapter 18. 18 to 25 is what we call the short road of Tanya, compared to the long road of the first 17 chapters. It's a short road where we're not creating a love of God, we're uncovering our natural love. So we're towards the end of chapter 25, which leads to chapter 26. 26 is a new subsection. I mean, there's no teacher's guide to Tanya, but this is how I think it's classically understood. Starting with chapter 26 through, let's say, chapter 34, is basically battling sadness and apathy, and instead serving God with energy, with joy. So here, as Sarah's saying, the psychological implications, because we're at the end of 25, so we are directly talking about utilizing the native, natural, hidden love to serve God, but we are, if it's appropriate to use the term, foreshadowing or transitioning into the next section of Tanya that will directly be talking about how to deal with sadness. So you're right.
I kind of think that what comes to mind when you're speaking about it, like, I didn't feel like it was talking about sadness and depression. I think, I mean,
No, it's not.
what I was
It's
thinking
not.
about, what I was thinking that I thought of the Baal Shem Tov story, where the Baal Shem Tov taught his Hasidim that everything they see is a lesson on how to serve God, and they saw a bunch non-Jews cutting a cross in the ice, and they asked him, what can you learn to serve, in the service of God? And this is exactly the lesson he was teaching them, is that when you're cold, then you could even take something as vibrant and alive as living waters, and it could be turned into something for the worship opposite of God. So you're
absolutely right. That is the point.
So I
Sarah
think,
was just taking this and going the next step,
right,
with
the
it,
next
which
step,
more connects to next chapter. There
right.
was
So
a reason why her mind went in that direction. But no, Fruma, what you're saying is a beautiful story. I don't know if everyone knows the story. If you haven't heard it before, or if you forgot it, what Fruma just said, that vignette from the Baal Shem Tov is, yes, that is the point the Rebbe is making here. Absolutely.
So I was just thinking, like, I don't know, I picked up a couple things where there was just, this was being discussed, this issue was being discussed, how people who are like, born into being religious or born into it often are, just do things by rote. They're not doing it because they're excited about it, not doing it like, it doesn't have that fire to them. It's just, this is the way I was raised, this is the way I do it, this is what I do. And I think this is what we're trying to fight against, is just being passionate and excited about serving God, and not just by rote type of thing. I don't know.
That's an interesting point from us raising, from us saying that a Baal Tshuva has an advantage here, because by definition, if they chose God, there's a certain excitement in the choice. There's a certain freshness, newness, passion. And then, of course, they all imagine their kids are going to be far better than them because, hey, they're born into it. And then their kids cannot be as interested because wasn't a choice. It wasn't as this exciting, I saw the black and chose the white. And it's rather like this is the reality. So it's more rote. Yeah, there's a point. And I think, of course, every Baal Tshuva ultimately still has to struggle with the coldness, I imagine, because after a while, the most exciting thing can become rote. It might take 5 years, it might take 25. So, we all have both pieces in us, just like we could all look inside of ourselves and see our beauty and see the parts we don't want anyone else to see. So we can all have the advantage and disadvantage of the Baal Tshuva, of the returnee to Judaism, and the advantage and disadvantage of someone who's always been doing this. And there are advantages and disadvantages to both and within both, and we have both within ourselves. So maybe here we need to pull out that returnee to Judaism piece of inside of ourselves that we all have. And that passion and that excitement and that freshness and that newness, and find it. And sometimes you find it by the stretch. Go where you've never gone before. Do what you've never dared, wished, dreamed to do before. Take a risk in your Judaism. And when you do that, it like opens things up. That's the piece inside every one of us, inside people that have been doing this their entire life and they're in their 70s. That piece of that returnee that we can all find somewhere where it's fresh and new and exciting. Much earlier, especially the way we go, I think it's chapter 15 of Tanya. The Alter Rebbe discusses, it's actually a concept in the Talmud, of someone who reviews his learning 100 times versus someone who reviews his learning 101 times. You say one more time, and the Gemara, the Talmud states, if you review your learning 100 times, you're not a worker. 101 times you became a worker. And the explanation is why. 100 times seems pretty impressive. If my students reviewed for a test 4 times, I would be overwhelmingly impressed. What's this 100 times business? Well, in those days, that's what they did. So 100 times was the norm. So it's a very impressive number, but it's still the norm. It still is not breaking ground. It's still not fresh. It's still not exciting. It's still not passion. 101 times is going beyond the norm. So it has all those elements. So I think what Frum is saying is a really beautiful, strong point for all of us to really say, yeah, that returnee to Judaism, that person it's fresh and it's new, it's exciting, it's passionate, and to find that inside of ourselves. Find inside of ourselves something we haven't demanded from ourselves to do, something we've never tried, something is, I wouldn't do that, and stretch. Because when you make that stretch, it's like the 101. It's like going beyond your barriers, and it wakes up your relationship to God, which Frum is correct. That is the point the Rebbe is saying here, though Sarah is also correct, because we're going to go into some of the ideas Sarah raised as we continue to the next chapter. So anyone else on a personal application, how you can take this strategy of the Rebbe? Again, the strategy is, if I'm willing to die to avoid a temporary disconnection, and dying is a very, very difficult experience with tremendous ramifications, tremendous repercussions, isn't it a lot easier to live? However difficult it is to live for God, but isn't it a lot less harmful and distressful and difficult than death? And live and create permanent, eternal connections. So push myself. Let me do more. Anyone else can see how they can take that concept or a piece of that concept and apply it personally to their own service of God? Well, let me rephrase my question a little then. For this strategy to work, what are the 2 things the Rebbe is saying that you really need to appreciate? What do you need to appreciate, to feel as valuable for this whole strategy to work?
Your natural love, your connection for God. That's what you,
The connection for God, okay. But very specifically, in the words of this strategy, what am I thinking about specifically that I have to really value? So from saying in general, the relationship with God, but very specifically, if you think about the focus of this strategy, what am I focusing on? That I have to appreciate as so valuable. What am I
How
like?
about, yeah, when an opportunity comes your way to do something and you do it with courage. So that kind of a situation.
Exactly. That's what I have to appreciate. I have to appreciate those opportunities. I have to really value them. I have to really value what the Rebbe is stating here. The Rebbe is comparing temporary disconnections to the permanent, eternal connection achieved by the mitzvah done, like Dottie said, with courage, with pushing yourself, right? That was actually, we discussed courage last time. It was 2 weeks ago. So I don't know if Dottie remembered, 2-week-long memory, that's pretty good, or she just intuited that's what we're discussing now. But we did discuss that 2 weeks ago, the idea of being like the lion, the courage, the pushing yourself, the going beyond your boundaries. So Froma said correctly, you have to appreciate your relationship with God, which is 100% true. That is, of course, what we're talking about here. But specifically how that relationship is expressed in the bonds created when I do that action with courage. When I create a permanent peace between me and God that's going to exist forever. Imagine the ancestor you don't know. Could be 4 generations back, it could be 2,000 years back, because you probably don't know any ancestors of 4 generations back. But imagine what they did then. Whatever good thing, however they pushed and squeezed and gave to God, it's still around today. It still exists today. It's still helping you, their descendant, today. For 2,000 generations, we're told. It still exists because it exists forever. So if you can appreciate that, or of course, if you want to think just about yourself or the ancestors you do know, any good ever done for God that you had to push, that you had to squeeze, they had to have that courage to go beyond and do, forever is a very heavy word. It's like when my children say to me, did you ever, never? I'm like, those words are too big for me. I can't say I never did that. I can't say I will never do that. I don't, how do I know? I can say I don't think so. I can say probably not, but I can't say ever or never. This is too big. But God can say those words. So God can say, this is a bond between me and you. How long is it going to last? Forever. It's going to last forever. If you just think of today, what did you do today for God? What were the pieces of today? Probably can't even remember the pieces of today. It was too long ago. And all those pieces are forever. Everything you did for God is forever. So that's what we have to really appreciate. If we really appreciate what that means, how precious is the bond, how powerful is this bond that lasts forever, then I can get into what the Rebbe is saying here, that I'm willing to die to avoid a temporary disconnection because I don't want any disconnection from God. How much more so? It's so much easier to suffer less and push myself and create these permanent connections that will always be there forever. Think of all the connections I'm reaping the benefits from all of my answers, how they change the world for me forever. And that's what happens every time we push to serve God. So therefore, the Rebbe now is going to discuss these bonds. What does it mean? How special is the bond? And how permanent is the bond? Because if I can really get how special it is, if I can really get how permanent it is, I'd have a heightened motivation to go for it, to push myself, to do what's difficult. And then as Firma said, when we push ourselves and when we do what's difficult and new and fresh and more than we ever demanded from ourselves, we feel it. It's the natural feeling, the freshness, the newness, the excitement, which is what the Rebbe says we want. Because if our evil inclination wants us to be cold, we know that's not a good space for us. We know that's actually a very dangerous space for us. And we want to be warm. We want to be alive. We want to be passionate. And we get to those places by pushing. The more we push past our limits, the more awake we feel in our relationship with God. So looking at that inside, Dehainu, we need to say, so now that I was going to explain of this concept, when a person does the will of God in this service means using that beautiful word that Dottie said, with courage, pushing, going beyond, squeezing, looking at that coldness and breaking past it. When you do this work, Yeskala ba pnimis ritzon ha'elyon, you are accessing the inner dimension of God's will, b'bchinas panim, from the level that we call his panim. Panim means like his face. Remember the face of the God that you can't see. Face means the pnim, the pnimi, the inner dimension. The giloi rav, and with tremendous, tremendous revelation. V'lo b'hester panim klal. V'lo b'hester klal, and not concealed at all. Ukashe'ein shum hester panim b'ratzon ha'elyon, and when there is no concealment in the divine will, in the supernal will, as I ein davar nifra klal v'klal, then nothing is experiencing itself as separate from God at all. Leos yesh v'davar b'fnei atzmo, to be something that exists separate from God's existence, which of course is a theme we've developed a lot over these chapters. And therefore, tiena nafsho halokis v'achiyunis v'lushehen, his godly soul, his vital soul, that means the animal soul when it's in a good mood, in its better, holier expression, and their garments, kulan miyuchados betachlis hayichud, all of them will be absolutely fused with the ultimate degree of fusion, with the will of God, with the infinity of the light of God, as we said above. So what the Rebbe is saying here, in very basic terms, is whenever you serve God, you're linking, you're drawing down an aspect of his will, because my service is his will. He has, he has all these wants that like are not really in a human understanding of why that's a want of God or why that isn't a want of God, but he's sharing with us his wants. He wants me to eat this. He wants me not to eat this. He wants me to say this. He wants me not to say this. He wants me to think this. He wants me not to think this, and many, many, many others. Every time I, the human being, plug into one of those wants by doing or not doing as per his want, what's happening is that will of God has now found expression in me. I'm the vehicle for his will. He wants a blessing to be said. So when I said a blessing, his will to say a blessing now was actualized with a piece of flesh, me, my lips, my mouth, my tongue, my palate, my larynx, saying the blessing. And so too with everything we do for God and don't do for God. Everything we do and everything we don't do are all means that his will now has human expression. So there's a link between me and his will with everything I do. And his will is a very high state of self, because will is higher, of course, than action, higher than emotion, higher than speech, higher than thought. So it's beyond all of those levels of self is will. It's a very deep level, to such a degree that our sages say nothing withstands willpower. because will comes from such a deep, deep inner place. So God's will also comes from a deep inner place of him, of his being. So nothing withstands willpower, and that will is what I'm connecting to every time I serve him. But now it's not just any time, because now the point of the Rebbe is I'm pushing hard. I'm pushing hard because I'm doing more than I normally do, because I'm doing deeper than I normally do, because I'm doing bigger than I normally do, because I'm overcoming the apathy or the indifference in a way that I don't normally do, because I'm doing it with passion and love and drive. As I'm going beyond my limits with this service, God, in a measure for measure space, is also uncovering himself to us beyond limits. So the God I'm accessing, that will of God that I'm accessing, is bigger, is stronger, is more uncovered than I ever normally get. What does this mean, more uncovered? There's always, of course, many barriers between us and God. I mean, that's part of how we can exist, because if there were no barriers, we probably cease to exist. That's the amazing craziness, so to speak, of Mashiach, when God will be completely uncovered and we will all exist, experience it and exist. How? The world will be a different place based on everything we've done to serve God from the beginning of time until now. We're morphing the world to a space where we can experience God uncovered, exposed, and we can handle it. And we don't lose ourselves in the process. So for now, though, God's relationships throughout this through many, many, many veils. But when we do this type of service, that's coming from such a deep place, going beyond my veils, going beyond my nature, breaking past, doing more, 101, not 100, God responds by breaking past his veils. So in this commandment, in this little link between me and God, in this relationship, God's exposed. There's no concealments. And when there's no concealments within that slice of that relationship, there's no sense of separation. Because of course there is no separation. But we are under the illusion of separation because of the barriers, because of the concealments. But when God's not concealed, all those illusions fall away. So it's a very, very sacred space between God and man when God is connecting to us on such a deep level of self that there's no barriers. And that's what happens when we serve God in this fashion. So that's really saying how enormously precious is this bond created when you squeeze hard in your service of God, when you tap into this love to empower you to really give God more, better, deeper, with more care, with more sensitivity, with more passion than you normally do. So that's the preciousness of the bond. Now the Rebbe is going to speak about the eternal quality of the bond. So the Rebbe says, and above, from God's perspective, the union, the bond created by this commandment, created by this action done by man, the will of God, lasts forever. Because God is above time. His will is above time. And the Torah, which is the expression of his will to man, the communication of his will to man, is also above time. God is beyond time. His will is beyond time. Torah, which expresses his will, is also beyond time. As is written, the word of God will exist forever. His words are living and existing, etc. And he's not going to change his law to us forever. So in its truest space by God, there's no limits. So therefore, when the Jew takes a piece of God's will and makes it physical, is manifesting God's will, that's also forever. God's forever, his will's forever, the Torah which expresses his will is forever, and therefore the mitzvah done by man is forever. And therefore the connection between man and God through that mitzvah is forever. But that's all in God's space. What about in my space? What about in my reality? Ella bat shalamata, below planet Earth. Utachas hazman. We are under time. Time is not a coordinate for God, but it's a very big coordinate for man. And only at that time, that he's engaged in it. But Torah o mitzvah, when he's learning Torah, when he's doing the mitzvah, that's when he experiences this unbelievable no barriers bond. Because afterwards, if he's involved in something else, he's separated. He's no longer connected. He's no longer tuned in. He no longer experiences the bond. So it doesn't feel very forever. It's forever, but it's not forever. Because when I stop, I lose it. V'hainu, meaning to say, when he's, the Rebbe is not even saying you're doing something wrong, even doing something very minor wrong, which means not doing the right. When you're just doing nothingness. There's no relationship, no functionality in your service of God. So the Rebbe said, inspire yourself. Inspire yourself by understanding how precious these bonds are. We did that, check. And inspire yourself by understanding these bonds are forever. We're like, I don't know about the forever piece. On one hand, they're forever. God's forever, his will's forever, his Torah's forever, the mitzvah's forever. So the bond created by the mitzvah's forever. But on the other hand, forever only lasts as long as you're doing the mitzvah. Because once you stop and disconnect yourself, because you're just not currently connected, you don't feel it anymore. Meaning, this morning, I davened. Hopefully everyone here davened. On some level, we davened. We prayed to God. But then I stopped davening. Now, if at the moment I stopped davening, I went on to learn, and then I went on to do a good deed, and then I went on to make a blessing, and then I went on, I could spend all day connected to God. It's not even so difficult. So it's very perhaps feasible that from the moment I woke up until the moment I go to sleep, I'm always connected. I never lose my connection. Not that I'm always doing the same action, but I'm flowing from one to the next, right? We flow from the prayers to the blessings, to the Torah, to the commandments, to another blessing, to another prayer, to another act of charity, to another prayer. I mean, I'm talking to God all day long, right? So we're always praying on some level. So we keep flowing and flowing and flowing with our connection with God. It never stops. So then all those bonds continue. But let's say that wasn't today's script. Let's say I just went on my phone and spaced out, surfing the web of nothingness. I'm not even saying I actually saw anything wrong. I didn't even get to that point. I just was looking at titles. I didn't open anything up. I wasn't going to open anything up. I know that's such a waste of time. I just wasted 5 minutes just looking at a bunch of titles that I didn't open up. So what did I do in those 5 minutes? I disconnected because I wasn't connected at that moment. I didn't do anything wrong, but I disconnected. Suddenly, all of that energy that I've been accruing, all of those connections that are feeding me from the innermost dimension of God's will. It's like I got a razor haircut or something. They're all gone. They left, they vanished. Now they didn't really vanish because the Rebbe said these bonds exist forever. And I said, imagine 2,000 years ago or your grandparents. So, I mean, we're saying they're forever. But in terms of them feeding me, I disconnected myself. Every single bond I've ever created is disconnected from me right now. Nothing is feeding me because I disconnected myself. Again, I didn't have to just know myself doing something forbidden per se. Just I wasn't connected. Like we're saying, like the Rebbe says, you're just wasting time. You're just not synced in. So that million connections that that were plugging into you and feeding you, they're all gone. So it doesn't sound very eternal. But the Rebbe says, sorry, let's put it. Nevertheless, when he returns, Hashem, he goes back to serving God. Acharkaf, later. L'Torah, l'Tefillah, he's praying, he's studying. And he asks forgiveness from God. That he should have been doing something good at the time and he wasn't. God will forgive him. Like the saying of the sages. If a person transgresses a positive, he didn't do what he should have done, he didn't study, he didn't pray, he didn't give charity, and he repents, don't move from there till you're forgiven. You'll be forgiven right away. So what the Rebbe is saying is as follows. I told you the bond's forever. I'm also telling you, as soon as you disconnect, you don't feel the bond at all. But when you reconnect and repent, you get them all back. So imagine just yourself, if it's too mind-blowing to think of any previous generation. If you're 30 or 50 or 70, however old you are, you have an entire lifetime of treasures, of energy bolts, wires connecting you to the source of energy. And each time you do another mitzvah, there's another connector. Just imagine your head with all these like wires coming out of it from this awesome source of all power, and it's all feeding into you. You have trillions and trillions and trillions of these connectors, because everything you've ever done good since the beginning of your lifetime exists forever. But the second you disconnect, you walk away, you close the book on God for a few minutes and do your own thing. You're just not doing his thing now. You're doing your thing. Shh. All of those connectors are disconnected from you, zapped off. You're not getting fed by anything now. They exist forever, but above, you're not getting any of them. They're all in the freezer from your perspective. When you start doing again, you form a new connector, but I had trillions. Now I have like 2. What about all those trillions? There says no problem. Repent. You don't need here a deep, hard, difficult repentance because you didn't do anything really wrong. You just stopped doing right. So when you turn to God with a sense of like the basic regret and remorse and confession and commitment, I don't want to space out on you again. I want us to be always feeling so one. When you return to God that way, they all come back. Which ones come back? Every single one you've ever created, because they last forever. And they're all there, just waiting for you to return to God. And then the trillions and trillions and trillions are again feeding you and will feed you forever unless you disconnect yourself. But if you do, remember to reconnect and they'll all come back. And therefore the Rebbe is saying they really are feeding you forever. So we're a little bit in the middle of this concept, but we will stop at this point because we could pretend a good breaking point for this idea. Any questions, any final thoughts on this? Okay, so we haven't had a class for 2 weeks. I think 2 weeks ago actually was when we learned the concept of that the Rebbe, actually the source for why we share our miracles. No, it was last week, Miketz, where the Rebbe says how sharing miracles is actually a way of bringing redemption, a way of bringing Mashiach. We're publicizing the miracles. We're thanking God for the miracles. We're letting everyone know that miracles exist, that God exists, and inspiring everyone to be aware and focused and grateful for their own miracles. I think the more we have gratitude for the miracles in our life, a very strong theme of Hanukkah, the more it's a catalyst for more and more and more. So who would like to share something with us from these past 2 weeks, Hanukkah, or what was before or since?
Maybe I'm talking too much tonight, sorry. But last night they had the fourth annual when Shalom Mordechai had his mace the last day. I was so inspired. I'd seen those clips a lot of times, but I'm like, I really need, my whole being just needed it. It was like getting a wonderful injection of emunah and bitachon.
Yes, my husband was listening to it, so I heard it from the background, and just the little bit I heard made me very, very emotional.
With music, and it was in Lakewood. There were hardly any Lubavitchers there. There were Bachram, off a lot from Lakewood, Hasidic people. It was just such Avas Yisrael that I was shocked when I turned it off and Mashiach hadn't come.
Yeah, it's nice to go into that space and just, I don't know, I guess my husband had mentioned it a few days ago, or somehow came up on the table. My kids were like, oh yeah, mommy was just crying straight for 2 days, and but yeah, it's good to, you're right, it's good to plug in and feel that gratitude and realize, yep, absolute Nisan.
One of the good things about technology, like this class.
Thank you. Yes. Anyone else have something to share?
Hi, it's Dottie. Hi.
Hi, Dottie.
So I received a notice that Rebbetzin Toby Twersky passed away. And I didn't know her, but I thought I would listen in on the Levaya. And I learned so much about this wonderful lady. It's like she was calling to me like, Dottie, I want to connect with you. And her son-in-law spoke about her life. Her father was a rav in a town in Poland. He was a big rav, and he stayed with the people and that just escaped to Siberia for the war. And they came to Chicago without a penny in their pocket, and they rented a little room. They couldn't even get an apartment, and she built up a family and a life. And I was so inspired. And Rabbi Twersky from Kal Hasidim spoke that she passed away when the Hanukkah became, there was no light and it was cold, and then she left us. And I was so inspired. This lady that I think she was from Quick Travel. Maybe I bought a ticket for her years ago. But what a special neshama. And I was so excited. I got to know this lady from attending her funeral. It felt like a gift that I got to also say goodbye to her. And I just was compelled to listen to the Lefaya, and it was just so special and beautiful. This lady had so much courage. I think just to be a Jew, you have to have a lot of courage. You have to have a lot of courage to be a Jew. So that was a real special interaction from last night. It was special.
Thank you for sharing. I think it takes a special person to do what you did and attend the Levaya of someone you don't know with this open sense of, we're going to have a relationship and it's starting now. That's very beautiful on your part, but that's very special that that we can get inspired when someone passes away. Their beauty is so strong. And you feel it and you see it and you connect to it. Absolutely. Absolutely. Anyone else? Okay, well, let us do some thought from the Rebbe on this time, 1992. Some thought the Rebbe connecting to Mashiach.
Should be as chus for Liba's neshama.
Yes, and we're saying this is a chus for Liba, because Liba was always the one that pushed me to do this. I always forgot. She'd take out the book, she'd have it right next to me, and I would still forget. And she would always remind me to do it. yes. Okay. So the Rebbe said this Torah portion in 1992, that as we've spoken many times recently, according to the proclamation of the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, the Rebbe Rayatz, everything's completed. We've completed all preparations for the redemption. And now we only need to draw down the redemption in actuality, in the physicality, in the coarseness of this physical world, that it should be revealed. Like on a spiritual level, it's all done, but we need to see it physically. We need to only open up our eyes, and then we would see that the whole world is demanding that every Jew should stand ready, should stand in a situation, should stand in a readiness for Mashiach, for the redemption. And we could say that this is the reason why we see that when Jews now stand with strength, with confidence, with ownership toward the world, if they want to, if this is their space, if this is going to be their will, then we have this ability. And this is reflected in our generation because we're walking toward Mashiach. The Lord says, since we're walking toward Mashiach, we're already at the point where Jews can act with strength and confidence and ownership in terms of our relationship to God, not being like that, exile Jew, ghetto Jew, scared Jew, embarrassed Jew, but a strong, proud, confident Jew, strong, proud, and confident in his relationship with God, and show this to the world. And this is hinted to, this Torah portion begins that Judah approached Joseph, Yehuda approached Yosef. So together with the strength of the work of the Yosef of our generation, which is a reference to the previous Rebbe, as the Rebbe says, because his name was Yosef, we have Yehuda. We have another figure, another player, besides the previous Rebbe. The Yosef of our generation is very unusual, where the Rebbe is separating the previous Rebbe from the persona of Mashiach. But that's what the Rebbe says here. We also have the Yehuda. So we have the Yosef, embodied by the previous Rebbe, whose first name was Yosef. And then we have the Yehuda, we have the Mashiach who's coming from David, not from Yosef, but from Yehuda. Oh, I don't know what just happened. That's cool. My computer's still working, but my electricity otherwise must have gone out because I see everything black because my room is black. You all can, maybe it's just my house. So I can't read anything more because I can't see what the Rebbe says here. But what the Rebbe is saying is that in this Torah portion, we have Yosef, and we have an even stronger power than Yosef. We have Yehuda. And Yosef represents the